I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome everyone to GM Tools, Games Within Games. Yo, I heard you like games, so I put a game in your game so you can game while you game. Game. In most cases, a game that you have within a game is more likely than not to be not quite as different as having people all singing. A lot of games within games are things like you pull out a chessboard and have characters play against each other in chess while giving a role-playing monologue about their strategies, and you learn, like, when the villain is like, sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn.
Or maybe you actually take the role of the pieces on the game board.
Yes, that's a pretty stereotypical one too, right?
Yep.
Where it's like everybody is a piece on the game board.
Nimba has a good example in Starfinder. You have to compete in a VR game.
Yep. I feel like one of the very early in-house beta tests we did of Starfinder was a VR game that also in the VR game had a vehicle chase. So you can absolutely have things like that happen. You can have a game of Towers, the somewhat heretical to real Harrowers game that is played with Harrow cards. You can have, what was one in D&D? Three Dragon Ante, the little deck that they put out? I think so.
I don't remember.
I think so. I think they put out a game called
Did
Three
I
Dragon
even ever
Ante.
know?
Maybe. But you probably didn't.
I mean, you know when I started. When
Yeah.
you recruited me to your game.
Yeah, you probably never knew. So all sorts of like in-world games can be fun ones to play in game, but you can also play ones that are sort of a little more meta, just to sort of represent the way that something is happening in the game. In that case, a game within game can act as a sort of subsystem, or as a replacement for a subsystem. Hi, Mentalic Mutant, welcome. So, for example, when we're talking about when you're doing an influence subsystem, that's pretty handy. But maybe your group loves to play the game Diplomacy. I wouldn't personally recommend it at all. But you could use the game Diplomacy to represent the influence system.
So you're talking here about using other games to adjudicate game mechanics. So like using a... So you could have actually the game Diplomacy that you pull out and you say, okay,
or
I'm
a game
going to
of
determine
chess,
this based on this.
or a game of towers. You could use another game literally to replace a subsystem within the game.
And we've done stuff where it's...
Mentalic Mutant points out that there's a famous indie game called Dread that literally used a Jenga tower as the mechanic for the horror game, and it's not that it even used the Jenga tower not in the way you normally play Jenga. Literally, you are just forced to play a round of Jenga of taking the stick out and putting it back on for your character's life every time you want to do something, and that is how you build up the horror in the game. So that Mentalic Mutant, that is an excellent example of, that's not even a subsystem, that's just a central mechanic of the game.
Well, I think that one of the places where you see this sort of thing most often is with puzzles, because puzzles are games within games.
Yeah.
If you have somewhere it's
A puzzle's a type
here's
of
a
game.
riddle, or here's a Sudoku, or here's some other sort of logic puzzle or something else that's going on.
Yeah,
then
people
here you
don't
go.
always think of it that way, but like a Sudoku is a game. A puzzle is a game. It's just a game that is played in a very particular way. But there are also games within games that might just be for fun, or for gambling that your characters are doing, or to show just how people play in the fantasy world that you're creating. Just to show off how the world is different. And that's something that often suggests that the game should have a very fantastic element that shows off whatever is fantastic about your world. So, for example, if you had a game in Pathfinder that was like, you had something that was like a collectible card game, but the types of magic were arcane, divine, occult, and primal.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Having the game represent some features about the world, or like a game where, and you might have in that sort of thing. Well, the monsters are the creatures that actually exist in the world, or a game, a game that you have in Starfinder where you have the various holographic pieces that represent certain features that are actually in the world. So magic or other, and the game itself could incorporate magic that exists in the world. So a game that involves flying, or a game that relies upon some kind of teleportation effect, or a game that, or a game where you need to do long distance communication that is facilitated by magic.
Yep. And people have mentioned in the chat all sorts of things that we have good other episodes for, such as Joe Jungers reminds that real-world puzzles can be cool, but sometimes players hog the puzzle or other players twiddle their thumbs. We have an episode about puzzles in your games that is all about that. Absolutely. And Mentalic Mutant points out subsystems kind of are a game. Their own game within the game. And that's true too. We have an episode about subsystems. I don't want to get too much into either of those two side points here, just because we've talked about it before, but absolutely. Those absolutely are types of games within games that you can use, and they are very strong uses of games within games.
Well, I think that one of the things that definitely comes up with games, and I was talking a little bit about magic, is something that can be used to create game rules that wouldn't otherwise be able to exist. But magic and other PC abilities very much influence what it means to have a fair game, and what kinds of rules a game would have, what ways people could cheat at games, and both what ways the PCs could cheat and what kind of cheats they can expect against them, and also what kinds of sort of protections and countermeasures games have. Because if you want the PCs to be competing against NPCs in a contest, then it's important to, if they're not just supposed to immediately steamroll, to set them up against NPCs who legitimately are going to be able to compete in that same sphere. So, if you have a contest that's about a contest of strength, then, something like that's going to be more straightforward. Okay, it's just who has the better athletics bonus. But if it's a contest where, somebody using invisibility magic is just going to automatically win, then maybe there's rules that say, okay, no magic, no invisibility magic in this contest.
I mean, yeah, you have to figure out how magic could work. Reminds me of a little story from, I was playing 2nd edition D&D. Actually, no, it might have been, I think it was 3.0, actually. It was just that there were some characters that were sort of brought over between them. Now I can't remember which one, but I think it was 3.0. And there was a rogue, and he was the world's best rogue. Yeah, it was 3.0 by this point in time. I let a player play like an NPC who was just this annoying high-level rogue who was in the world. And he decided that what he wanted to do was recruit a thieves guild of all of the best thieves and rogues who were as good as he was. So he offered a ridiculously valuable reward and built this gauntlet of traps and monsters that was almost impossible to get past, that he would find only people who were almost as good as he was to join his guild. And he just sat back, and tons of people, NPCs, tried to get in there and just died. And in the end, there were a handful of wizards who made it to the end, and that was it. Because there were no other rogues who were good enough to overcome the traps and monsters that he had set, but there were some wizards who could, like, invisibly fly over some of it. And so he pivoted and decided to run a felonious wizards guild with the wizards, and it worked out. But you do need to make sure you set the rules of engagement there, and that was something he did not do, and that caused it so that he was letting through wizards more so than rogues.
And that also makes me think of the rewards for the game as well. What is going to incentivize the PCs to participate? Is it going to be and it doesn't have to just be like, and the reward is money. The reward can be information, or a lead for a quest, or some kind of interesting item, or something like that. I know that we certainly have our fair share of stories, and we had one in the Council of Thieves campaign that just came up, of PCs rigging, either knowing that the PCs are highly favored to win something, or cheating, and or by fair methods, or cheating, so that the PC is set up to win, but nobody else believes in the PC, and so the PCs bet huge amounts of money on their own party member and then win big.
Excuse me, we were not cheating in Council of Thieves. It was just that my character was famous for fighting melee solo as a Morningstar user in completely non-magical gladiatorial combat, never casting a spell, but was actually a summoner. And so people expected her to lose a summoning contest against the city's best summoner, who has won like 30 summoning contests in a row.
That's true.
Against someone who legitimately people know of as a celebrity who cannot cast magic at all. It just turned out that I was a summoner. You know.
But I mean, a game doesn't have to be necessary. But I mean, that a game doesn't necessarily have to be fair for it to be fun. As long as it's fair whenever PCs are kind of competing against each other, it's okay if the PCs can completely crush the game. Games can be a really interesting puzzle in that way if the players are looking for a way to cheat, or a way to get around, or a way to make it to play with people's expectations.
Yep. And games within games also they have their own victory condition and their own failure condition. And it's different than the victory condition or failure condition of the entire role-playing game as a whole. So it can be easier for the PCs to lose one and not feel like they've lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
It can be easy for them to win big and not feel like, well, now there's nothing left to do in the game. Because of the fact that they've just sort of solved the game within the game. And almost you would call it, in any other genre, a game within game, you would call it like a metagame.
Mm-hmm.
Because like a film within film is a metafilm. But you don't call it a metagame because the metagame is actually the game that is above the game, not the game that's below the game.
What about the metagame?
The metagame.
Or the metagame.
No, because that metagame would be when we have an episode discussing metagaming and strategizing about metagaming. That's the metagame.
That's true.
Scheherazade approves this topic.
As does Beatrice. We also have discussion in the chat of a game that your PC may not necessarily be well advised to play, where you try to eat things that may or may not be food and see who can keep them down.
Oh boy. Is it food?
Mm-hmm.
So there's all sorts of ways you can play games within games, but the first thing you have to think about is, what does this accomplish in my story?
Mm-hmm.
Is it crucial? Does it actually fulfill part of the narrative and progression, like a replacement subsystem would? Is it just for fun?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to give some money? What are the stakes? How is it being used? What is the narrative value to it? It doesn't have to have stakes to have a narrative value.
Yeah, and do people want that disruption from the standard gameplay? Like, because I know with subsystems and things like that, and in first edition, sometimes we get into things where people are like, I want to do the standard thing. I don't want to do learn this new system in order to adjudicate this particular thing. So is the fact that it might be more of a load on the players to switch gears going to be worth it? And if it's a game that's familiar to them, then that load is going to be less.
That's right.
Like if you have a group where you like to play board games together and you also like to play tabletop role-playing games together, and you guys decide that you're going to pull out one of your favorite board games to decide something, then that sort of lowers that a bit too. But I mean, that does get back to sometimes, like, just because someone enjoys the role-playing game you're playing doesn't mean they're necessarily going to enjoy the specific game within game representation that you choose. So
that's right.
Same thing with puzzles.
That's why step one is, what are the stakes? What is the role? Why are you doing this? And you should know why. It could just be just for a change. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Or to just illustrate something. Step two move right on into it,
Mm-hmm.
is how are you representing the game within a game? Because depending on your goal, it could just be that you just want to kind of describe, yeah, this is sort of like a teleportation tag,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to do it by rolling certain checks. Or Truco, the game in War for the Crown, that's a croquet style game that has its own first edition version. I created a second edition version that just generally involves rolling a Truco lore based check, which could also be an intelligence check, to think of good sort of swings that you can make. And you can get better or worse swings if you get a critical success, or try for harder swings. And then depending on how good of a swing that you found, you can try various difficulty up to the maximum of the most complicated one that you found that are worth more points. But those require you to make a finesse-based attack roll with the Truco mallet. And so that was sort of how I decided to do it mechanically. First of all, my players were not there with me, and second of all, I did not want to play a croquet-like game and have their actual ability to do that influence the game. But sometimes you do, so you have to decide, is it okay that the player's player skill might be able to influence the outcome? If your answer to question 1 was, it does influence the outcome, and your answer for question 2 is, I want to play a game that has player skill.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that case, it's possible that, for example, you're playing a game where somebody is playing the card sharp who is the ultimate card player and gambler, but in real life, they absolutely are terrible. And somebody else is just way better than them, and their character is a loser to the barbarian who has 7 in all of their mental ability scores.
Mm-hmm.
And also is cursed with a cursed bad luck in the game that causes them to never get good luck on anything.
Mm-hmm.
In the role playing game, because the human who is playing that barbarian in real life is not cursed with a cursed bad luck and is good at bluffing and playing poker, for example, if you decide to play a game of poker.
Mm-hmm. Well, but it also sort of depends when you're playing the game what is the win condition for the players. Because I could also see doing something where it, just like with a puzzle, for example, where if the pieces as a whole solve it, then the group solves it, and you can tell the narrative where, everybody knows that like, Janet's really good at puzzles, but Janet's playing a 7-it barbarian, so, and Bob's character is a wizard, so, like, for our narrative, we're gonna say that, like, Bob's wizard solved it because Bob doesn't really like puzzles, but Janet really likes puzzles,
Yes.
so we can...
So it's like Bobilius the Amazing, Bob's
Yes.
wizard character, is the one who came up with these ideas, even though out of character Janet came up with those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Kitsune Warlock told players that they're playing indie RPG with pre-gens that were nameless mannequins in a maze, but they eventually realized they were their own D&D characters hit an event maze spell and lost their memories by an artifact, but then they restored their powers.
Oh, that's cool.
That kind of gimmick is definitely awesome. That's the kind of thing that I like pulling on my players with the old bait and switch works well if you have players who are gonna like it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that goes up there with the sort of like, yeah, reinforcements are coming, Norse heroes, just hold off. Mm-hmm. And then they don't come, and they all TPK, and then they continue the adventures Einherjar that I pilled once. Or, like, your character was actually the BBEG all along. That's why you have amnesia as your backstory, because you gave yourself amnesia so that you could fulfill your evil ritual. But then the part of you that is your character is split off and use the psionic ability to get a new body now, and the villain is split off from you.
Yeah.
Like, it can be a little risky to pull a gotcha like that, but can also be very, very awesome. And I think it's worth it.
Yeah. So, there's one more thing I wanted to say is, like, you don't have to do it that way, but that's just sort of if you're, where you displace it onto the character that would have made the most sense. But that's a strategy you can use if your players like to do that. There's also a lot of room for sort of co-op games and things like that in general to be something that you use. So like when we had the caravan combat minigame in the Jade Regent adventure that you ran for us, that was a co-op game that all of us were doing together, sort of against the NPCs.
I created a new type of game that was like many co-op games where you're forced to do something bad after you do something good. You draw some hero cards, and a good thing happens, a neutral thing maybe happens, and a bad thing happens every round. For example. But that's definitely true. Now, there can be some situations where Linda's strategy doesn't work because either the PCs are playing against each other or they're playing against an NPC, but let's say you, the GM, are just better than the combined sum of your players at the game that you're playing. But good news, GM. You could just play worse. It doesn't matter if, really, if there was genius gambits going on, right? Let's say your entire group is as bad at the game as can be, the game that you're playing, but they just want to play it anyway. It doesn't matter if they won because they were as brilliant as possible and you were as second brilliant as possible, or if they won because you played literally as badly as you could possibly think of and they barely beat you. The point is that if their character was supposed to be better at it, you can play badly enough that they will win. The problem is when your character is supposed to be way better at the game and you are definitely not better. In that case, you might want to have the player who's best at it play for the NPC.
There's also there's also room to alter the rules of the game in some way. Like, for example, to apply certain advantages to characters that have more bonuses going into the game. So, like, you're playing a resource-based game, and the player who's really good at this skill starts with some extra resources, which indicates the sorts of things going on.
And some of those engine-building games, starting with a few resources, could be a huge advantage, so it could help out. Rico played a game where they played one game to collaboratively build the world, and then play a campaign in there in a different system. The reveal that was going to be all the bad things happened because one of the players was a jerk to the world in the world creation game. BBG was his avatar.
That's great.
That's pretty funny. That's a good example of a game within game where the whole sort of new main game was the game within the game of the one-off of creating the world. Absolutely. It's always good when you can tie things together so it feels coherent rather than just like, oh, now we're randomly doing this other thing that makes no sense. Like, I know that Linda and I like playing Spirit Island as a cooperative board game, but that still doesn't mean it makes sense if your PCs are like, alright, we're going to go and win this foot race against the Aspis Consortium. Alright, to represent that, let's play Spirit Island. But why? Like, it doesn't make any sense that a foot race would be represented by playing Spirit Island.
I mean, that's something that's very divergent, but you may want to play, for a foot race, you might want to play a game that's more based on time or speed in some way. Because if you have sort of the general feel of the game the same, you can totally rename the pieces to be what you need them to be. Put a little flavor reskin on the game.
That's right. You could definitely do that. Like, for example, if the PCs were defending against hordes of undead that were all encroaching onto their lands, and the PCs were powerful magic users who wanted to destroy those undead, maybe you could play Spirit Islands.
Yes, and then you just reflavor the settlers and the
settlers are the undead. Yeah. The Dahan are the people who are working with the PCs.
Yeah,
etc. You could do it. But not for a foot race. Katrina says Spirit Island, any excuse. There you go. So the point is, though, that you need to choose a game that has the right feel for the feel you're trying to evoke, especially if you're picking like a pre-published game rather than just creating your own subsystem or little mini game or rolling a Truco lore chart.
Yes. You also want to consider the length of the game that you select, whether it's a pre-published game or a new one that you put in. Is this something that the players want to do for like an entire session, that the main focus is that, hey, we're shaking this up and we're doing something different? Or is this more something that the players want to do for 20, 30 minutes and then they want to go back to the regular game?
Yep. Think about how you could intersperse it together. For example, I gave the PCs a few interesting caravan combats that were good set pieces throughout Jade Regent that Linda was talking about with my system of draw a card that's a good thing, a card that's a neutral thing, a card that's a bad thing. But then part of that was all set up because at the very end there's a giant rebellion and there's an attack by your allies and then you're fighting the enemies. And so during rounds of combat that the PCs were fighting, on the PCs' turns, I had them also draw caravan combat cards and talk about how the rebellion was going on. It's like, oh, okay, well, this card came up for that person in the good slot. Okay, well, Shalalu is doing great and has taken off the sentries on that tower. Oh, a bad slot for this character, which would mean they got injured, or captured. It's like, yeah, this person is in big trouble.
But if we hadn't
they could be a casualty.
If we hadn't both been very familiar with our characters and how they interact with the normal combat system, and also been familiar with the caravan combat system, that would have been really overwhelming and complicated and convoluted. But since we did know that, then both systems we were able to do that and just have
it also
was
good
twist.
for pacing because the person was done with their turn, so then they did the caravan combat while the next person was deciding what they were going to do. And so yeah, that was sort of like both things were happening at the same time, and giant raging storm and this whole giant battle, and it was showing that the battle was happening in real time at the same time. So you can have it interspersed like that, but it can be challenging, like Linda said, unless it's something they really know. So let's see. We talked about deciding what part of your story your game within the game takes, picking the right game, and worrying and wondering about whether player skill being important is okay for that, for your group and for the situation. And then we talked about some examples of when we've done it, when some people in the chat have done so as well. When we put up games within games, were there any other subtopics that you wanted to make sure we got?
I think that, subsystems are something that comes up a lot in this, and I know we wanted to make sure that we didn't dwell on subsystems.
Yeah, we don't want to redo the subsystem.
We don't want to redo the subsystem episode, but I think it is worth talking a bit about sort of scoring as a larger measure that comes here. Scoring, and what does it mean to to win?
So you've played your game within game. How should you score it? Whether it's a subsystem, a victory point one that's very common in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or you just went and played diplomacy, or whatever you did. What you want to do with your scoring is not to say, okay, well, there's just like, you won if you got this much point, if it's point based, if you got this many points, or if you beat me and you lost otherwise. You want a range of outcomes, because of the fact that ultimately a range of outcomes allows you to express more nuance in what's happening. Maybe sometimes you only need a binary outcome, depending on when you use the game within a game. But a lot of the time, it's more fun if there's a kind of a wide outcome where it's like, okay, it could have gone the best, it could have gone the worst, it could have gone, or somewhere in between, depending on how well you did at the game.
We have some examples here. Tak, make an impression on the wise old man by losing but making it a beautiful game. You wrote his name on the go board with his own pieces. So yeah, doing some kind of clever move during the game, having an impact on how people and on the result. Even if it's not just even necessarily about what is your final score.
Yep.
Relative to certain
and
numbers.
That's a good example. Also, the one with Tak, lose but do something beautiful. For the Truco, more for the crown, the way to make the best impression on the Truco loving person is to score really well, but also make sure that she gets some good rounds too, rather than just absolutely embarrass her by winning every round and every point and just be that one person sweeping everything. Then she just gets frustrated that in her favorite game that she's very good at, that this PC is just constantly like preening and getting all of the points. So sometimes the best result is not actually just sweeping everything.
I like this other example here from Metallic Mutant. Playing a poker game, making gutsy bluff, losing, but impressing the opposition with your guts.
That's right. Be like, that was some nerve.
And I think that
I like your style.
This goes back to the idea of thinking about how the game represents what's actually happening in the game. Because if it's something like poker, where it's like you're playing poker and your characters are also playing a card game, then that parallel's easier to draw. But then if you're playing something that's a little farther out, then having those kinds of parallels into like, okay, what do these kinds of pieces represent in our game world that we're in, our larger game world, or Pathfinder or Starfinder, whatever tabletop game we're playing, helps translate the events of the game within a game back into the actual game.
I could see a situation where, like, the villainous overlord is playing a game of chess against the paladin and just sneering, being like, this is why you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game. And then the paladin plays and loses, slowly loses, refusing to ever sacrifice a single pawn to get a goal. It's like, I will never sacrifice any of my pieces to you. It's like, but you have lost. And the paladin says, have I, though? This is while you've been gloating and playing me at this game of chess, the party rogue has gone into your castle and stolen your MacGuffin.
Yes.
Sometimes you don't need to sacrifice anyone to win, but sometimes you have to be willing to sacrifice the king. Or your own piece. I know you could destroy me now, but that won't make you win when we have your MacGuffin. So I think you'll let me go, evil overlord. Something like that. Rex Liquid says Tokaido could be a fun downtime travel, visit the hot springs, and hope you find monkeys. So there's just all sorts of ways that you can think about to use a game, a different game, or even just something as simple as little checks to indicate that there is a game within world, to enrich your world and enrich your play and give players something a little different. But like Linda said, number one most important thing to remember, even if it's not the first thing you should ask yourself, is how long it's going to take. Because if you're really playing diplomacy, which can take weeks of time to play, you're not going to get back to your normal game for a while.
But if a game is something that's going to have a powerful impact on the story, though, you want to also make sure that it's complicated, just for the same reason that, like, you wouldn't want to distill down a really complex and impactful social encounter down to a single D20 roll where you just check your results.
That's right. So if you do have the undead are invading, how does your kingdom hold it off? And Spirit Island is very long, but you could do that. But you probably don't want tic-tac-toe to be to be the answer. It's like, you can hold them off as long as they can't get 3 X and bones in a row.
And Kitsune Warnock has a good point here, that activities are fun too. You brought pumpkins and markers to Reaping What We Sow. That's awesome. Drawing on the pumpkins in character for the pumpkin carving contest. Yeah, totally. You can have related activities too. I know this is something that I've done a little more with games with younger players, having ways to draw and have other forms of self-expression going on during the game. But I've also found with Reaping What We Sow specifically that a lot of that players of all ages really enjoy having some other sort of activity on the side that's representative, just like having music or having props or having visual aids can help immerse in the action. Sometimes having something tactile to do that can relate to the events of the adventure can be really engaging as well.
All right. So I think that's actually about it for this topic.
This
it was
is not the
a little bit
most
of a shorter
topic,
one, but hey, you know. So shall we say farewell to YouTube?
Yeah, let's
Goodbye,
do it.
YouTube. See you next time.
Bye.